3,000 star systems, a trillion souls, an empire so vast it took light itself years to cross from one border to the next. And at its heart, a palace, black stone, living crystal, towers clawing at a violet sky. Inside, a ballroom, glittering, thousands of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, drinking, laughing, unaware, on an elevated throne, an empress, young face, ancient eyes, golden hair catching the chandelier light like a promise about to break. And behind her, 3 paces back, standing where no human had ever stood before, a man, bruised hands, tired eyes, a museum piece pistol strapped beneath a ridiculous ceremonial uniform. The galaxy called him a joke. The Empress chose him as an insult. He was neither. Below the dais, 4 servers moved through the crowd in perfect diamond formation. Their eyes weren't scanning guests. Then the music stopped, and every giant in the room fell, except him. He was kneeling. That was the first thing. Not standing, not fighting, kneeling, in a room painted with the blood of things that were not human and things that were. Cade Brennan, 34 years old, 6'2", 210 pounds of bruised muscle and cracked ribs, in a shoulder wound that smelled like a barbecue pit in hell. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the simple fact that his body had been running on battery fumes for the last 6 hours, and the battery had just died. Around him, bodies, Korvathi soldiers, 8 feet tall, fanged, armored in crimson and gold, crumpled on the marble floor like broken statues. Their eyes rolled back, their muscles locked in violent frozen spasms. Some of them were still twitching, and standing in front of him, her, Seraphina, Empress of 3,000 star systems, ruler of a trillion souls, looking like she'd crawled through the underworld and come out the other side carrying someone else's severed ambition in her bare hands. Her white gown was torn at the hem, soot streaked across her collarbone. Violet blood, not hers, smeared along her jawline like war paint she didn't ask for. But her hair, God, even now, that long golden hair still caught the emergency lighting and turned it into something sacred, like a halo that didn't know the cathedral had burned down. She looked at him, those gold eyes, ancient, infinite, terrified, not of the assassins, of him. She opened her mouth, said one sentence, just one, and then the screen went black. 3 weeks earlier. Here's something they don't teach you in school. The universe is enormous, absolutely incomprehensibly vast. And in all that vastness, in all those billions of spinning galaxies and burning suns and impossible civilizations built on the backs of species that had been sailing between stars while humans were still poking each other with pointed sticks, humanity ranked dead last. Not second to last. Not somewhere in the embarrassing middle. Last, rock bottom. The galactic equivalent of the kid who shows up to a Formula One race on a tricycle, and the tricycle has a flat tire. Humans had stumbled into the intergalactic community barely a century ago, coughing through the smog of their crude fishing drives, offering nothing of real value beyond cheap agricultural exports and even cheaper manual labor. They weren't biologically immortal like the crystalline Valerians. They didn't possess the towering armored bulk of the Korvathi. They couldn't regenerate limbs, couldn't breathe underwater, couldn't see in the dark. They were just apes, soft, squishy, embarrassingly breakable apes who had figured out how to split the atom and fling themselves into the dark. And the galaxy never let them forget it. Cade Brennan knew exactly where he stood on the galactic food chain. Somewhere between household pest and mildly entertaining novelty. He'd accepted it the way you accept gravity. You don't have to like it, it just is. I was sitting in a concrete gray dormitory room on the capital world of Crimea. The room was the size of a large closet. because that's what it had been before someone slapped a cot in it and called it human-grade accommodations. The ceiling was too high built for species that averaged 7 to 9 feet, and the single overhead light buzzed at a frequency that made his left eye twitch. On the tiny fold-out table in front of him, a screen, flickering, buffering. 4-second signal delay between Prima and Earth. 4 seconds there, 4 seconds back, which meant every conversation felt like talking to someone across a canyon. You say something, you wait, you watch their face freeze mid-expression. Then their response arrives, late, always late, like a letter from another life. The screen resolved, and there she was, Wren. 12 years old, brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her mother's nose, his stubborn jaw, sitting at the kitchen table in their old apartment in Chicago, the one with the crack in the ceiling that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years before the divorce. Dad, she held up a piece of paper, grinning. I got a 92 on my math test. 4 seconds. Cade smiled, and it was the only real smile he'd worn in weeks. 92. That's my girl. What happened to the other 8 points? 4 seconds. Wren rolled her eyes, 12 years old and already perfecting the eye roll. Mrs. Patterson counts off for messy handwriting, which is so unfair because my answers were right. Life's unfair, kiddo, but your answers being right, that's what matters. 4 seconds. The image froze. Wren's mouth half open, then it caught up. Are you safe, Dad? And there it was, the question he dreaded every single week. Because Wren was smart, smarter than he'd been at 12, smarter than most adults he worked with. She knew her father wasn't doing security consulting for an off-world trade company. She knew, she just didn't push, because she was also kind. And sometimes kindness means letting the people you love keep their lies. Safe as houses, Cade said. Boring gig. I mostly stand around guarding doors. Lots of standing. Very glamorous. 4 seconds. Wren narrowed her eyes, deciding whether to call him on it. Then she chose mercy. Okay, come home soon. Soon as I can bug. Promise, promise. She believed him. That was the worst part. She believed him completely because she was 12. And 12-year-olds still believed their fathers could keep promises made across 400 light years of empty space. The call ended. The screen went dark. Cade sat there for a long time, staring at his own reflection in the black glass. A tired man with tired eyes and a jaw that hadn't unclenched since he'd landed on this planet 6 months ago. I thought about the promise. Come home soon. He thought about all the things soon meant when you were on your second consecutive off-world contract. 14 months since O'Hare, 2 contracts, 3 planets, and still no closer to home. Soon was a lie, a kind lie. The kind fathers told daughters and then hated themselves for at 2 in the morning. I thought about the last time he'd held her. The airport. O'Hare. Wren in her too big green jacket, hugging him around the waist, not crying, which was worse than crying because it meant she'd already learned to hold it in, already learned that the people you love leave, and you just stand there, and you let them. He'd whispered, I'll be back before you know it, Bug. That was 14 months ago. He picked up the small frame photo he kept beside his cot. Wren at age 7, missing her 2 front teeth, laughing so hard her eyes were squeezed shut. He'd taken that photo at Navy Pier on a Sunday afternoon, before the divorce, before the off-world contracts, before everything became about sending credits home and counting the days. He put the photo down, face up, always face up. Then he pulled on his boots, checked the ceramic composite armor that looked like cardboard compared to what the aliens wore, slid his sidearm into its shoulder holster, a chemically propelled 9mm handgun, the kind of weapon the galaxy considered a museum piece, a caveman's toy. And he went to work. The Obsidian Palace was not a building, it was a statement, a massive, sprawling complex of black volcanic stone and living crystal. Towers that pierced the violet sky like the horns of some sleeping god. Courtyards the size of football stadiums. Hallways wide enough for 3 Corvathi to walk abreast, which meant wide enough for 6 humans, which meant Cade always felt like he was walking through a world built for giants, because he was. The Corvathi were the dominant species of the Empire, 7 to 9 feet tall, dense scales in shades of slate and iron, horned, fanged, built like someone had crossbred a linebacker with a dragon and then wrapped the whole thing in natural body armor. They lived for centuries, they were terrifyingly strong, and they ran the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. Cade was a contractor for Aegis Solutions, a private military company that supplied human security personnel to off-world clients. The pay was exceptional, the respect was non-existent. Humans were hired for one reason: they were cheap. Cheaper than drones, cheaper than robots. And unlike machines, you didn't have to pay for replacement parts when they broke. You just hired another one. Cade's current assignment was simple: guard a minor trade delegation at the Obsidian Palace. Smile, nod. Don't touch anything. Don't make eye contact with anyone important. Blend into the background like the forgettable primate he was. He was absolutely, categorically, not supposed to be standing in the grand courtyard of the Corvathi Empire, lined up alongside 24 of the deadliest mercenaries in the known universe, waiting for the Empress herself to choose a new personal vanguard. And yet, here he was, a bureaucratic error, a misplaced contract number, a data clerk who couldn't tell the difference between security detail trade annex and security detail royal selection. One wrong digit in a filing system, and suddenly Cade Brennan from Chicago, Illinois, Earth, was standing at parade rest among towering alien warriors who could crush his skull between 2 fingers. The courtyard was massive, open to the violet sky, columns of black stone rising like the ribs of some ancient beast. Hundreds of Corvathi nobility stood on elevated viewing platforms, watching, whispering, their scaled faces arranged in expressions that Cade had learned to read over the past 6 months. Amusement, contempt, boredom. At the far end of the courtyard, a raised dais, an obsidian throne, and standing before it, General Draven, Lord Commander of the Imperial Military, a hulking nightmare of a Corvathi, 8.5 feet tall, scales the color of dried blood, a jagged scar running from his left temple to his jaw, a trophy from some war Cade had never heard of. His eyes were small, mean, the eyes of a man who had clawed his way to power through a mountain of other people's bodies and planned to keep climbing. General Draven had arranged this entire ceremony, handpicked every warrior in the lineup, his men, his loyalists. The new personal vanguard of the Empress would answer to her in name. But in practice, they'd answer to Draven. It was a power play wrapped in tradition, and everyone in the courtyard knew it. Draven was speaking now, his voice a deep, grinding rumble that echoed off the stone columns. Your Radiance, I present the finest warriors of 12 combat castes, each one tested in blood, each one sworn to die before allowing harm to reach your sacred person. He gestured to the lineup. Massive, monstrous, beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful. A Corvathi gladiator from the Blood Wastes who had killed 40 beasts in the arena. A Valerian crystal guard whose body could deflect energy blasts. A 4-armed Draelith who carried a blade in each hand. And then, at the end of the line, like a typo in a love letter, Cade, 5'14" in a galaxy of 8-foot giants, wearing off-the-rack composite armor that looked like it came from a costume shop, holding nothing but a ceremonial staff that was clearly decorative because it weighed about as much as a broomstick. He could feel the stares, like sunburn. Every alien in the courtyard had noticed the anomaly, and Cade's brain started doing that thing, that beautiful, terrible, uniquely human thing where it narrates your own humiliation back to you in real time. You are standing in a lineup of alien super soldiers. You are wearing armor that costs less than their belt buckles. You are holding a stick, a decorative stick. in front of the ruler of 3,000 star systems. And everyone, every single being in this courtyard, is looking at you like someone brought a hamster to a wolf convention. Great. This is fine. This is totally fine. The whispers started, rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Some of them weren't even whispering. They were just openly laughing. A Korvathi noble on the second viewing platform pointed at him and said something that made his entire group double over. Cade didn't need a translator. Laughter sounds the same in every language. So does the specific pitch of laughter that means you are the joke. Draven noticed. His scarred face twisted, embarrassment flashing through those mean little eyes before it was replaced by something colder. Your Radiance. He turned to the throne. There appears to be a clerical error. A human has been placed in the selection line. They are a fragile species, prone to disease, easily crushed, lacking any natural weaponry or defensive capability. I will have it removed immediately. Silence fell, and then she appeared. Cade had seen images of Empress Seraphina before. Holovids, official portraits, the kind of carefully curated imagery that empires use to project power. None of it prepared him. She stepped from behind the obsidian throne, and the courtyard went quiet. Not the polite silence of protocol, the involuntary silence of a room full of predators recognizing something that outranked them on a level they couldn't name. She was tall, just over 7 feet, but she didn't carry her height the way the Korvathi soldiers did, like a weapon. She carried it like music, like something that flowed rather than struck. And her face. This was the part that broke Cade's brain for a solid 3 seconds. She looked young, not ancient, not weathered by 3 centuries of rule. She looked like a girl in her early 20s, smooth, luminous skin the color of fresh cream, pale, almost glowing, as if someone had taken moonlight and shaped it into a person. High cheekbones, a delicate jaw, lips that held the faintest suggestion of color, like rose petals pressed between the pages of a very old book. And her hair, long, golden, not the brassy gold of dye, the deep, warm gold of late afternoon sun pouring through honey. It fell past her shoulders, down her back, almost to her waist, catching the violet light of the Crimean sky and turning it into something that belonged in a painting, in a cathedral, in a dream you'd had once and spent the rest of your life trying to remember. Her eyes were gold, not brown, not amber, gold, like molten metal, like the core of a dying star. Ancient eyes in a young face, eyes that had watched civilizations rise and crumble and rise again. She wore a white gown, simple, elegant, no armor, no weapons, just flowing white fabric in a crown of delicate keratin horns that swept back from her brow like a natural tiara. Cade forgot to breathe, which was stupid, because she was an alien empress, an alien empress who ruled 1 trillion souls across 3,000 star systems and could order his execution with a flick of her delicate wrist. But his lungs didn't get the memo. They just stopped, for a full 3 seconds, like a computer hitting an error screen, because she was, without question, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and her eyes looked tired. Not physically, something deeper. The exhaustion of someone who had been surrounded by people for 300 years and hadn't trusted a single one of them. The loneliness of a queen, invisible to everyone who wasn't paying attention. And Cade, damn him, was always paying attention. Seraphina's gold gaze swept the lineup, slowly, deliberately. She studied each warrior the way you'd study dishes on a menu you'd ordered from 1,000 times before. Nothing surprised her, nothing impressed her. She looked bored, and then her eyes reached the end of the line and stopped. On Cade, he felt it like a physical thing, like a spotlight, like a rifle scope, those gold eyes locking onto his brown ones with an intensity that made his skin prickle. She tilted her head, just slightly. the way a cat tilts its head at something small and unexpected. Draven stepped forward. Your radiance, as I said, a clerical error. This creature is human. It cannot protect you. It is a walking punchline. A stiff breeze would shatter its spine. I will know. One word. Her voice was something Cade hadn't been prepared for either. Musical, layered, like three voices speaking in perfect harmony. It came through his translator earpiece as English, but the original sound, the raw alien timbre of it, resonated somewhere in his chest, in his bones. I choose him. The courtyard went so silent you could hear the wind moving between the columns. Draven's jaw tightened. The scar on his face went white. Your radiance, surely this is a jest. Do I look like I'm jesting, General? It wasn't a question. It was a wall. Draven tried anyway. That creature cannot protect you. It is smaller than your handmaidens. It possesses no natural armor, no enhanced reflexes. No. Then it is fortunate that I rule a civilized empire and not a gladiator pit. General. Seraphina's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. It simply became the only sound in the universe. Unless you are suggesting that the Empress requires protection from her own court, checkmate, in one sentence. Because if Draven pushed further, he'd be implying the palace wasn't safe, which meant his own security had failed, which meant he was either incompetent or complicit. Draven shut his mouth, but his eyes, those mean, calculating eyes, they burned. Seraphina descended the dais, each step measured, graceful, her white gown trailing behind her on the dark stone. She walked the entire length of the warrior lineup, past the 8-foot gladiators, past the crystal guards, past the four-armed blade dancers, all of them watching her with a mix of reverence and hunger. She stopped in front of Cade. Standing this close, the height difference was almost comical. She towered over him, looking down with those ancient gold eyes. This close, he could see the faint, iridescent shimmer on her skin, like crushed pearls dusted across porcelain. This close, she smelled like something he couldn't name, something clean and vast, like the air before a thunderstorm over an ocean he'd never seen. What is your designation? Cade Brennan, ma'am. She tested the syllables, rolled them around her mouth like an unfamiliar fruit. Cade Brennan. A pause. Congratulations. You are now the shield of the Empress. Do try not to die from exhaustion while walking up the palace stairs. Scattered laughter from the nobility. Cade stood there, processing, his face showing nothing. But inside was a different story. She just called me her shield. The Empress of the Korvathi Empire just told me not to die walking upstairs. I'm standing 3 feet from the most powerful woman in the galaxy, and she smells like an ocean I've never seen, and she just made me the most famous joke in 3,000 star systems. Ren is never going to believe this. Actually, Ren is never going to hear about this. Because if Cade told his 12-year-old daughter that he was now the personal bodyguard of an alien empress who looked like an angel with golden eyes, Ren would have questions, specifically the kind of questions a 12-year-old asks when she suspects her father has developed feelings for his boss. And Cade did not have feelings for his boss. He had a mortgage and a child support payment and a very healthy sense of professional detachment. Professional detachment. He repeated that to himself 3 times, like a prayer, the ultimate insult to the military caste. The Empress had chosen a squishy, pathetic, human over the finest warriors of the Korvathi Empire. It was a political joke, a meme born in real time, a slap across Draven's scarred face delivered with a smile so subtle you'd need a microscope to catch it. Cade was handed the ceremonial staff, a decorative piece of absolute junk, and positioned 2 steps behind the throne. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't let anything cross his face, because Staff Sergeant Garrett Hale, his former commanding officer, had drilled one truth into his skull during the hellfire of the Orion Belt Wars. a truth Cade carried like a scar. Never let your ego compromise your situational awareness. So Cade watched. He watched the way Draven's hands curled into fists at his sides. He watched the way 6 of the warrior candidates exchanged glances too quick, too coordinated, a silent language. He watched the way the courtyard staff rearranged themselves after the selection. Who moved closer to Draven? Who moved away? He filed everything. Every glance, every hesitation, every microsecond of coordinated eye contact between warriors who weren't supposed to know each other. Garrett Hale had taught him that. In a bombed-out refinery on Orion 7, sitting in rubble, sharing a canteen of recycled water that tasted like rust. The enemy tells you everything before the first shot, Garrett had said, gray-eyed, calm, the calmest man Cade had ever known in a combat zone. You just have to be patient enough to listen. Cade had been patient for 3 weeks, listening, and he said nothing. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in creative humiliation. The Galactic Press ran holovid segments analyzing Cade's fragile bone structure and primitive cardiovascular system. One network brought in a xenobiologist who demonstrated using a synthetic human arm exactly how many pounds of pressure it would take to snap a human femur. The answer was less than most Korvathi could generate with a casual backhand. The segment went viral. The Royal Guards placed bets, openly, in the barracks, on a holographic betting board. How long until the human accidentally kills himself? Current favorites trips down the grand staircase at 3-to-1 odds. Crushed by a closing blast door at 5-to-1. Simply forgets to breathe at 8-to-1. That last one got the biggest laughs. Kale was the worst. Young, Korvathi, maybe the equivalent of early 20s in human years. Tall and lean by Korvathi standards, which still meant 7 feet of dense scaled muscle. He was one of the junior royal guards, ambitious, proud, and absolutely furious that a human had been placed above him in the security hierarchy. He made sure Cade knew it. Every day, small things. A shoulder check in the corridor that sent Cade stumbling into the wall. An accidentally locked door that left Cade standing outside the Empress's chambers for an hour in the cold. Comments muttered just loud enough to hear. Careful, the ape might slip on its own sweat. Someone fetched the pet its kibble. One morning, Kale blocked the corridor outside the Empress's council chamber. Arms crossed, scales gleaming under the bioluminescent ceiling lights. He looked down at Cade the way you'd look at a stain on your shoe. Tell me something. Human. His translator rendered the words flat, but the contempt needed no translation. Do you understand what you are? What your species is? You are a footnote in the history of a galaxy that was ancient before your sun ignited. Your greatest warriors would not survive 10 seconds against a Korvathi child. And you stand behind the throne of our Empress, like a pet someone forgot to put back in its cage. Cade looked up at him. 7 feet of young, arrogant, angry alien. You done? Kale's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer. You do not belong here. Probably not. Cade stepped around him, kept walking, didn't look back. Behind him, Kyle stood in the corridor, fists clenched, confused, because he had expected anger, or fear, or some display of primitive emotion that would confirm everything he believed about humans. He got nothing, and nothing, it turned out, was the most unsettling response of all. Cade wasn't here for their respect. He was here for the 200 credits per week that went directly into an account on Earth. An account that paid for Ren's school, Ren's clothes, Ren's Tuesday night piano lessons that she complained about but secretly loved. And because he was doing something none of them noticed, he was learning. While the Korvathi guards relied on their overwhelming physical strength and automated sensor drones, while they swaggered through the palace corridors, secure in the knowledge that nothing smaller than a tank could threaten them, Cade was doing what humans had spent 1,000,000 years perfecting on the savannas of East Africa, being paranoid. He studied the palace blueprints, memorized every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every blind spot in the security grid, and there were more than there should have been. He noted the rotation schedules of the guard shifts, identified which doors had manual overrides and which didn't, mapped the geothermal infrastructure beneath the palace, the steam pipes, the plasma conduits, the ancient catacomb tunnels that predated the palace itself. I watched the dignitaries, not their words, their bodies, micro-expressions, gait patterns, the way someone's eyes darted toward an exit 3 times in 10 minutes, the way a particular aide's hands trembled when Draven entered a room, fear not cold. He watched Draven most of all. The general was careful, disciplined, but he had a tell. Whenever he was angry, truly angry, not the performative fury he used to intimidate subordinates, his left hand would drift to the scar on his face. Just briefly, a ghost of a touch, like he was reminding himself of something. A grudge, a wound that hadn't healed. Draven touched that scar every single time he looked at Seraphina. And on day 11, Cade saw something else. A late-night meeting. In a corridor, the security cameras didn't quite cover one of the blind spots Cade had already mapped. Draven, speaking with 2 figures Cade didn't recognize. Smaller than Corvathi, hooded. Their body language was wrong. Too rigid, too controlled. Military bearing in civilian clothing. They spoke for 4 minutes. Then the hooded figures disappeared through a service exit that Cade happened to know led to the palace's external docking bays. Draven stood alone in the corridor for a moment, touched his scar, then walked away. Cade didn't follow, didn't confront, didn't report, because reporting meant trusting someone. And on this planet, in this palace, Cade trusted exactly 0 people. He filed it away, added it to the growing architecture of something he couldn't yet name, but could feel. The way you feel the barometric pressure drop before a tornado. The air gets heavy, the birds go quiet. Something was coming. It was the 14th night. Cade was doing his final perimeter check, a habit no one had asked him to develop, a habit no one thought a human was capable of developing. He moved through the upper corridors of the West Wing. Silent. The palace was designed for Corvathi footsteps heavy, thundering. The marble floors amplified every stride into a drumbeat. But Cade weighed 210 pounds. To this palace, he was a ghost. He turned a corner and stopped. The observation balcony, one of the smaller ones, reserved for the royal family, open to the primine night sky. 3 moons hung low on the horizon, casting everything in a pale blue light that made the white stone glow. And standing at the railing, alone, was Seraphina. No crown, no gown, just a simple white shift. Her golden hair unbound, falling free, catching the moonlight the way a river holds the reflection of the sky. Her bare feet on the cold stone, her hands resting on the crystal railing. She looked small, which was insane, because she was 7 feet tall, but standing there, alone, without the throne and the ceremony and the 1,000 watchful eyes, without the armor of absolute power. She looked like what she actually was beneath all of it. The wind moved through her hair, slow, golden strands lifting and falling, and the moonlight caught the curve of her cheek, the line of her neck, the way her fingers rested on the railing, not gripping, just resting. As if she'd been standing there so long she'd forgotten she was holding on. 300 years of holding on. Cade thought about his grandmother, Dorothy Brennan, 87 years old when she died, sitting in her armchair in the back room of the house on Ashland Avenue, looking out the window at the rain, saying nothing, for hours. And when Cade, 15 at the time, had asked her what she was thinking about, she'd said, "Everyone I ever loved is in the ground, and I'm still sitting here looking at the rain." He'd never forgotten that voice, the specific weight of it, and he heard that same weight now, in Seraphina's whisper. She didn't know Cade was there. He was 20 feet behind her, in the shadows of the corridor arch, perfectly still. She spoke, softly, to no one, to the moons, to the empty air. 300 years, a pause, and still, no one real. Cade's chest did something he didn't give it permission to do. It tightened. Not the tightness of danger, the tightness of recognition, because he knew that sound underneath her voice, the frequency of it, the loneliness. He'd heard it in his own voice, sitting in a concrete closet, staring at a black screen after the call with Ren ended, in the silence between the last word and the first breath afterward. He backed away, silently, left the corridor, didn't look back. I didn't mention it the next morning, or the morning after. He didn't change the way he stood behind her throne, didn't alter his expression, didn't offer sympathy or acknowledgement. But something shifted inside him, quietly. This wasn't just a paycheck anymore, A19. Cade was conducting his unauthorized nightly sweep of the royal quarters. The guards thought he was just wandering, the human, pacing around like a lost pet. They didn't realize he was working a grid pattern, systematic, methodical, the same room-clearing methodology Garrett Hale had drilled into him during the Orion Belt campaigns. Garrett, don't think about Garrett. I was checking the Empress's private study, a room she used for classified communications. The walls were lined with sound-dampening crystal that prevented eavesdropping. State of the art. Cade wasn't looking at the walls. He was looking at the furniture, specifically. The underside of the communication console, a recessed panel where the power coupling met the data relay. Something was wrong. He pulled out a small flashlight, another primitive human tool. The aliens found adorable and crouched beneath the console. There, wedged between the power coupling and the relay housing, a device, small, matte black, about the size of a thumbnail. Cade's blood went cold. I didn't touch it. He pulled out his personal datapad civilian grade, junk by galactic standards, and ran a passive scan. The device was broadcasting on an encrypted frequency, tight beam, nearly undetectable by Corvathi sensors because it operated on a wavelength their equipment wasn't calibrated to scan. But Cade's datapad was human-made, calibrated for human wavelengths, and the device was broadcasting on a human frequency. Human technology, in the Empress's private study, behind the most secure walls in the palace. Someone from Earth was spying on Seraphina. He left the device in place, didn't disturb it. If he removed it, whoever planted it would know they'd been compromised. Instead, he memorized its exact position, its broadcast frequency, the serial encoding on its housing partially scratched off, but he caught enough to identify the manufacturer. G4S Interstellar. That name sent a chill through him. G4S was one of the largest private military corporations on Earth. Ruthless, connected. The kind of company that didn't just take contracts. They manufactured the conflicts that created the contracts. What are they doing here? What do they want with her? He didn't have answers, not yet, but he had a thread. And Cade Brennan, for all his flaws, was very good at pulling threads. Day 21. The summons came at midnight. A palace attendant, tall, gray-skinned, expressionless, appeared at Cade's closet room door and informed him that the Empress required his presence in her private chambers. Immediately. Cade's first thought, she found out about the bug. She thinks I planted it. I'm dead. His second thought, if she wanted me dead, she wouldn't summon me to her bedroom. She'd have Kael snap my neck in the hallway, which he'd enjoy. His third thought, why am I thinking about her bedroom? Stop it. Stop it right now. He followed the attendant through corridors he'd already memorized, past guards who watched him with open contempt, through a set of massive doors that sealed behind him with a sound like a vault closing. The Empress's private chambers were enormous. Of course they were. Vaulted ceilings painted with scenes from Corvathi mythology, a balcony overlooking the capital city, furniture scaled for royalty. And Seraphina, sitting on a low couch, still in her formal white gown from the day's court session. Her hair pulled back now, revealing the elegant sweep of her jawline, the delicate horns curving from her brow. She held a crystal glass of something that glowed faintly blue. She looked at Cade, and something in her expression was different from every other time she'd looked at him. The amusement was gone. The performative disinterest was gone. The mask was gone. What remained was calculation, and beneath it, desperation. Close the door. He did. Sit. He didn't. I'd rather stand, ma'am. The faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile. You do not trust me. I don't trust rooms I can't leave. The door is not locked. With respect, ma'am. I'll believe that when I try it. This time she did smile. Brief. Genuine. It transformed her face in a way that made Cade's chest do that unauthorized tightening thing again. Garrett Hale trained you well. Cade went very still. Yes. Seraphina set down her glass. I know about your former commanding officer. I know about the Orion Belt campaigns. I know about the 17 confirmed kills and the field commendation you refused because you said, and I quote, I didn't do anything worth celebrating. She stood, walked toward him, slowly, each step deliberate, her gold eyes holding his. I know you call your daughter every week. Ren, 12 years old, attends Lincoln Park Middle School in Chicago, plays piano on Tuesdays. You send 70% of your income to her mother. Cade's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Instinct. He caught himself, stopped, but his jaw was locked. His pulse was climbing. Why do you know that? Because I read every file, of every person, in that courtyard. Silence. I did not choose you as a joke. Cade Brennan. The words landed like stones. General Draven has spent the last 2 years systematically replacing my personal security detail with his loyalists. Every warrior in that lineup answered to him. Every single one. If I had chosen any of them, I would have been surrounded by his men, isolated, controlled. She stopped, 3 feet from him, close enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. I needed someone Draven did not own. So I'm a chess piece. You are a gamble. She held his gaze, steady, unflinching. The only one I had. Cade stared at, processing, rewiring. Everything he'd assumed about the last 3 weeks reshuffling in his head like a deck of cards being cut. The joke, the mockery, the humiliation. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't cruelty. It was cover. She had chosen the one person in the galaxy that Draven would never see coming, because Draven, like everyone else, had already decided humans were nothing. Why tell me now? Seraphina turned away, walked to the balcony, stood where he'd seen her standing 14 nights ago, moonlight in her hair, the weight of 3 centuries on her shoulders. Because I am running out of time. Her voice was quiet. Draven is going to move against me. I do not know when. I do not know how. But I can feel it. She looked back at him, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. Behind the gold eyes and the crown in the 1,000-year dynasty. Fear. Real, honest fear. I have ruled this empire for 3 centuries. I have survived 14 assassination attempts, 6 coups, 2 civil wars. I have done it alone, every time, because there was no one I could trust. She paused. You call your daughter every week, even though the signal takes 4 seconds each way, even though the image is blurry and the connection drops. You sit there, patient, waiting for every pixel of her face to load. I watched you do it on the security feeds. Cade's breath caught. A man who loves like that does not betray. The room was so quiet, Cade could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the distant hum of the palace's geothermal systems far below, could hear the wind moving across the balcony where Seraphina had just told him something she had apparently never told anyone, that she was afraid, that she was alone, that she was trusting him, not because he was strong or fast or powerful, but because she had seen him wait 4 seconds for a blurry image of his daughter's face and decided that was enough. Cade exhaled, long, slow. If Draven moves, he said, I'll be ready. Seraphina studied him, those gold eyes searching his face for something, a lie, a hesitation, a crack. She found nothing. I believe you will, she said softly. And somewhere, in a corridor Cade had already mapped, behind a wall Cade had already scanned, a tiny human-made device continued its silent broadcast, sending every word, every frequency, every secret, to someone Cade hadn't found yet. But he would, because the storm was coming. And Cade Brennan, the walking punchline of the galaxy, the squishy, breakable, laughable ape from Earth, was the only one who could feel it. I walked back to his closet room, sat on the cot, picked up the photo of Ren, 7 years old, missing teeth, laughing. He held it for a long time. Then he set it face down, for the first time, not because he loved her less, because he loved her enough to focus, to stop looking at what he might lose and start preparing for what was coming. He pulled out his datapad, opened the palace blueprints, zoomed in on the grand ballroom, the location of the upcoming Equinox Gala, the biggest political event of the Corvathi decade. Thousands of guests, dozens of entry points, a security grid designed by Draven's people, blind spots he'd already cataloged. If I were going to make a move, Cade thought, this is when I'd do it. Maximum chaos, maximum audience, maximum damage. He studied the blueprints until his eyes burned. Then he turned off the datapad, lay down on the cot, stared at the too-high ceiling somewhere above him. Seraphina was standing on her balcony, looking at 3 moons, counting the years. Somewhere below him, in the geothermal guts of the palace, steam hissed through ancient pipes, and the bones of the planet groaned under the weight of everything built on top of it. And somewhere out there, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the orbital defense grid, beyond the reach of Corvathi scanners, a ship was waiting. Cade couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, couldn't know it was there, but he could feel it, in his gut, in the place where instinct lived, where 1,000,000 years of hunting and being hunted on the plains of Africa had hardened into something the galaxy didn't have a word for. The Corvathi called it weakness. Garrett Hale had called it the edge. Cade just called it being human. And in 5 days, at the Equinox Gala, the galaxy was going to find out what that meant. The Equinox Gala was not a party, it was a performance. A massive, glittering, obscenely expensive performance staged once every Corvathi decade, where every major power broker in 3,000 star systems gathered in one room, drank liquid starlight, ate things that cost more than Cade's entire annual salary per bite, and casually decided the fates of billions. The Obsidian Palace had been transformed. The Grand Ballroom, a cathedral-sized chamber of black volcanic stone and living crystal, was now drowning in bioluminescent flora. Flowers that pulsed with soft blue and violet light. Vines that crawled along the columns like glowing veins. Floating crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. Drifting overhead like luminous jellyfish in a dark sea. It was beautiful, otherworldly. The kind of beauty that made you forget you were standing in the throat of something dangerous. Cade didn't forget. He stood in his designated position, 3 paces behind the Empress's elevated throne, wearing a ceremonial uniform that someone in the Royal Wardrobe Department had clearly designed as a joke. It was a tight, stiff, leather-adjacent thing that made him look like a penguin who'd been stuffed into a corset. The collar alone was an instrument of slow torture, pressing into his Adam's apple every time he swallowed. 2 steps to his left, a Corvathi honor guard who was 9 feet tall and weighed roughly the same as a Honda Civic. 2 steps to his right, another one, identical. Both of them staring straight ahead with the intensity of statues who took their jobs very seriously. And between them, Cade, looking like someone had accidentally dropped a human into a diorama of alien warfare. This is fine. This is fine. You're fine. You're a grown man standing behind the most powerful woman in the galaxy in an outfit that makes you look like a waiter at a fetish restaurant. Everything is totally normal. His 9mm was strapped under the tunic, against his ribs, where it pressed into his skin with every breath like a small, comforting reminder that physics still worked. His combat knife was in his boot. Old habit. Garrett Hale's voice in his head. The voice that lived there permanently now. Like a tenant who refused to leave. Always have a blade you can reach without thinking. Because the moment you need to think about reaching it, you're already dead. Below the dais, the ballroom was a living ocean of bodies. Corvathi nobility in their obsidian finery. Valerian crystal beings refracting the light into rainbow cascades. Solari diplomats sleek, gray-skinned, moving through the crowd with that fluid, unsettling grace. Representatives from 100 species, 1,000 worlds, all of them talking, laughing, drinking, performing. Seraphina sat on her throne in a white gown embroidered with threads of actual gold. Her hair swept up and pinned with crystal combs that scattered the chandelier light across her bare shoulders. She was a vision, radiant, untouchable, the centerpiece of the entire spectacle. To Cade, she was a target sitting on an elevated platform in the center of a room with 14 entry points, 6 emergency exits, and a glass dome ceiling that could be breached by any half-competent strike team with a shaped charge. Tactical nightmare. His eyes swept the room. Again and again and again. The same grid pattern. Every 30 seconds. Human pattern recognition wasn't just a skill. It was a biological inheritance. 1,000,000 years of evolution spent on the savannas of East Africa, where the ones who spotted the hidden predator in the tall grass survived, and the ones who didn't became lunch. Cade was very, very good at spotting predators. 8:47 p.m., Galactic Standard. The Empress had been holding court for 2 hours, receiving delegations, accepting tributes, smiling the specific smile of a woman who had done this 10,000 times and could do it in her sleep, and probably had, below her. The ballroom hummed with the practiced chaos of galactic politics. Species that had been at war for centuries standing 3 feet apart, sipping the same drinks, pretending they didn't want to murder each other, and weaving through all of it. 4 servers. He saw them. 4 Solari servers. Gray-skinned, elegant, hired for the event because the Solari were known for their beauty and obedience. They carried trays of crystalline drinks through the chaotic crowd. Smiling, deferential, invisible in the way that servants are always invisible to people who think they're important, except they were moving in formation, not the loose, meandering pattern of waitstaff working a crowd. They were in a diamond, tight, coordinated, the kind of formation you learned in military training, not hospitality school. And their eyes, their large, dark, liquid eyes were not scanning the guests. They were tracking the perimeter guards, noting positions, counting heads, measuring distances. Cade's pulse ticked up, just slightly. A small internal alarm bell ringing in the deep part of his brain where instinct lived. He tapped his comms earpiece, kept his voice low, flat. "Command, this is Brennan. I have 4 unknowns moving in a tactical diamond toward the dais. They're dressed as catering staff. I need a biometric scan on Solari servers immediately." Laughter, actual laughter, crackling through his earpiece. The voice belonged to the Corvathi security captain, a condescending, booming bass. "Relax, little ape. The palace is wrapped in a Class 7 biometric dampening field. No weapons can be brought inside. No threats can pass the outer perimeter. Enjoy the music, have a drink, try not to soil yourself. The line went dead. Cade stared at the four servers. They were closer now, 30 feet from the dais, still moving in perfect synchronization. His mind was racing, doing the math. If they don't have weapons, how do they plan to do this? He looked up. The massive glass dome, the heavy durasteel doors, the bioluminescent flora pulsing on every surface. He looked at the crowd. Thousands of Korvathi, their complex, highly evolved nervous systems. And then, like a fist closing around his stomach, he understood. They're not going to use weapons on the Empress. They're going to use the room. The music stopped. Not a gradual fade, not a technical glitch. The sound was instantly, violently, sucked from the room, as if someone had reached into the air and ripped it out with both hands, replaced by something worse. A high-pitched whine, agonizing, piercing. It vibrated in Cade's teeth, in his jawbone, in the fillings he'd gotten at a dentist's office on West Division Street in Chicago 12 years ago. Pitched just outside the normal range of human hearing, like the universe itself was screaming through a keyhole. Cade's head throbbed, his vision blurred for a split second, a spike of pressure behind his eyes, and then it passed. For him, it passed. For everyone else in the room, it didn't. Every single Korvathi in the grand ballroom seized. Simultaneously, their massive bodies went rigid, muscles locking in violent spasm, eyes rolling back until only white showed, mouths frozen open in silent screams. They fell, all of them, at once. 8-foot warriors, hulking generals, delicate noble women in their obsidian jewelry, General Draven and his entire elite guard detail. They hit the marble floor like felled trees. The sound of their armored bodies striking stone was thunder. Hundreds of impacts, overlapping, echoing off the vaulted ceiling like the drum roll at the end of a civilization. And then, the convulsing, helpless, involuntary, their clawed hands scraping against the marble, their horned heads cracking against the floor. 1,000 apex predators reduced to twitching, drooling, paralyzed animals in the span of 3 seconds. It was the most terrifying thing Cade had ever seen. Not because of the violence. He'd seen violence. He'd lived violence. But because of the scale and the silence. A room full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Every one of them helpless. Every one of them stripped of everything that made them dangerous. In the time it takes to sneeze. The Valerians dropped too. The Draelith. The insectoid Cathari ambassadors. Species after species. Every advanced alien nervous system in the room. Short-circuited. Overloaded. Shut down. The only sounds left were the hum of the neuropulse generator. The wet, meaty sounds of bodies convulsing on stone. And the smell. God. The smell. Alien sweat and fear pheromones and the ozone tang of overloaded nervous tissue. A smell that would live in Cade's memory for the rest of his life. Seraphina gasped behind him. A sharp, broken sound. Her hands flew to her throat. Her golden eyes went wide, the gold flickering, dimming, her body slumping sideways on the throne, her elegant fingers clawing at the armrest as her nervous system fought the pulse. And lost, she collapsed, half draped over the side of the throne, her golden hair spilling forward, hiding her face, her breathing shallow, rapid, her limbs trembling. Paralyzed, the Empress of 3,000 star systems, paralyzed on her own throne. Cade stood behind her, upright, head pounding, vision slightly blurred at the edges, jaw aching from the frequency, but standing, a neurological pulse weapon, a device that broadcast a precisely calibrated frequency designed to overload complex nervous systems. A billion-credit assassination tool, theoretical, until now. And then the realization hit him, cold, metallic. The frequency was calibrated to attack every advanced alien nervous system in the room, every single one, but not his. Human nervous systems were primitive, insulated, incredibly dense, simple wiring in a galaxy of quantum fiber optics. But that wasn't an accident. You don't build a billion-credit weapon and accidentally forget to include one species in the targeting parameters. Someone had specifically, deliberately, programmed this weapon to leave humans standing. Why would you do that? Unless you knew a human would be in the room. Unless you wanted that human alive. Unless the human was part of the plan. Am I the plan? No. No time. Think later. Move now. The 4 Solari servers dropped their trays. The crystalline glasses shattered on the marble. A sharp, musical sound, like wind chimes at a funeral. From their sleeves, they drew weapons, long, jagged, blades that glowed with compressed plasma, the kind of weapon that didn't register on standard metal detectors because it had no metal. Just contained energy shaped into something that could cut through bone. They leaped onto the dais, all 4, moving with terrifying speed, their dark eyes locked on the paralyzed Empress. Focused, professional, dead calm. The assassins expected to walk up to the throne, step over the twitching bodies of 1,000 warriors, and sever the Empress's head while the most powerful room in the galaxy lay helpless on the floor. They did not expect the joke to move. Cade didn't think. Thinking was too slow. He reached under his ceremonial tunic and drew the weapons he had smuggled past a security system that considered them too primitive to scan for. A high-carbon steel combat knife, 7 inches, worn handle, nicked blade, 20 years old, and a chemically propelled, suppressed, 9mm handgun. Garrett Hale had given it to him 4 years ago with 5 words, "Physics still works." The lead assassin lunged, plasma blade raised over Seraphina's exposed neck. Crack, crack. 2 hollow point rounds, center mass. The kinetic force, a concept foreign in an era of energy weapons, lifted the gray-skinned killer off his feet, threw him backward, down the stairs, dead before he hit the marble. The remaining 3 froze. Their large black eyes snapped to Cade. The human was standing over the paralyzed Empress, pistol raised in a 2-handed grip, feet shoulder-width apart. His face showed nothing. No anger, no fear, just cold, focused, predatory calm. "Back off," Cade said. He racked the slide. The sound of a round chambering echoed off the stone walls. In that silent ballroom full of twitching bodies and dead assassins. It was the loudest thing in the universe. They charged. It was the loudest thing in the universe. They charged, all 3, simultaneously, converging from 3 angles. Cade kicked the Empress's throne. Hard. The massive chair tipped backward, spilling Seraphina out of the direct line of attack, just as a plasma blade cleaved the air exactly where her neck had been. The second assassin closed the distance. The plasma blade sliced horizontally. Cade ducked, felt the heat pass over his head, close enough to singe his eyebrows. He stepped into the attacker's guard and drove his combat knife upward, under the jaw, through the soft tissue, into the brainstem. He ripped the blade free, pivoted, fired his remaining magazine into the third assassin. 6 rounds. The gray body dropped in a spray of violet blood that misted across Cade's face like warm rain. The fourth assassin, the leader, didn't charge. She threw her plasma blade, like a spear, spinning end over end, trailing blue light. Cade twisted, but he was human, fast for his species. But his species was not fast. The blade caught his left shoulder. A graze. But a graze from a plasma weapon was a trench. The compressed energy sliced through leather, through skin, through muscle, carving a deep, searing, cauterized wound from shoulder to collarbone. The smell of his own burning flesh. Sweet, Horrible. Cade stumbled. His left arm went partially numb. The assassin closed the distance, tackled him, drove him to the ground, her hands wrapped around his throat, squeezing. This was the moment the galaxy assumed humans would break. But humanity had a secret weapon, a biological cheat code forged in the terrifying wilds of prehistoric Earth. Adrenaline. Cade's adrenal glands detonated. A massive payload of epinephrine dumped into his bloodstream. His pupils blew wide. His heart slammed against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. The pain in his shoulders ceased to exist, replaced by something older and more terrible than pain. The cold, calculated, primal rage of a cornered animal that has decided it is not going to die today. This was humanity's evolutionary inheritance. Not claws, not fangs, not armor or venom, or the ability to regenerate limbs. The galaxy had all of those things covered. What humanity had was the ability to flood its own nervous system with a chemical cocktail so powerful that a 150-pound grandmother could lift a car off a trapped child. The ability to override pain, override fear, override the rational voice that says you are outmatched and you should stop. Humans didn't stop. That was the secret. The one thing no xenobiologist had bothered to study, not how strong humans were, or how fast, or how durable, but how absolutely, certifiably, unreasonably unwilling they were to quit. The assassin watched Cade beneath her, and something shifted in those dark eyes. Confusion, because the human wasn't passing out, wasn't going limp, wasn't surrendering. The human's eyes locked onto hers, wide, feral, burning. Cade didn't try to pry her fingers from his throat. That was a losing game. She was stronger. That was a fact. Instead, he jammed both thumbs directly into her eyes. She shrieked. Her grip loosened. Cade bucked his hips. The lighter creature flew sideways. He scrambled up, grabbed a silver wine decanter the size of a bowling ball, and swung it into the side of her skull. Crunch. Silence. The grand ballroom was entirely silent, save for the low hum of the neuropulse generator, the distant sound of convulsing bodies, and the heavy, ragged, broken breathing of one human being. Cade stood over the paralyzed Empress, his shoulders screaming, alien blood dripping from his face. He wiped the violet blood from his eyes, looked down at Seraphina. She was staring at him, her golden eyes wide, her body still paralyzed, but her eyes were moving, and in them, an emotion she had never felt in 300 years of life. Absolute, visceral, terror, not of the assassins, of the blood-soaked ape standing over her. Cale saw everything. He'd been standing at his post near the eastern colonnade when the pulse hit. His body had gone rigid mid-stride. He'd collapsed forward, his face slamming into the marble. He couldn't move, could only stare sideways, through a gap between two fallen nobles. At the dais, he watched the human kill. The speed, the brutality, the absolute absence of hesitation. Cade Brennan shot a man with a weapon that predated faster-than-light travel, stabbed another one through the skull with a sharpened piece of metal, and beat a fourth one to death with a wine decanter. Lying on the marble, paralyzed, helpless, the most humiliating moment of Cale's young life. He had spent years training, building his body into a weapon, earning his place among the Royal Guard through combat trials that would kill most species. He had been proud of his scales, proud of his strength, proud of his superior biology, and a single frequency had dropped him like a puppet with cut strings, while the human stood. The human he'd mocked, the human he'd shoulder-checked in corridors, the human he'd called ape and pet. That human was up there, bleeding, fighting, doing the job Cale couldn't do because his superior biology, the thing his entire identity was built around, had been turned against him. Cale had always believed that strength was the ability to crush, that the measure of a warrior was the damage he could inflict. But lying on that marble floor, staring sideways at a human who weighed less than Cale's armor, he understood something that reordered every assumption he had ever made. Strength isn't the ability to crush. It's the refusal to be crushed. It was the worst moment of his life, and the most clarifying. The pulse wore off in waves. Kyle felt sensation return to his fingers first, then his arms, then his legs. He dragged himself upright, muscles screaming, vision swimming. He walked toward the dais, every step an act of will. Cade's head snapped up. His pistol came up, aimed directly at Cale's face. Their eyes met. "I'm not a threat," Cale said, his voice raw. "Prove it. I was wrong about you. Let me help." A beat. 2 seconds. The pistol didn't waver. Cade's brown eyes searched Cale's face. Reading, calculating. He lowered the gun. "Help me move her. We're leaving." The palace was no longer a sanctuary. It was a kill box. And as Cade half-carried the semi-paralyzed Empress through the service corridors with Kyle guarding their rear, the grim math crystallized. This wasn't a fringe attack. To bypass the planetary shields, disable the biometric scanners, smuggle in a neuropulse generator and 4 assassins, you needed deep institutional access. This was a coup. "My legs," Seraphina slurred, her voice thick. She leaned against Cade, her weight enormous. 7 feet of alien royalty pressed against his wounded shoulder. The pain was extraordinary. He ignored it. "You killed them," she stammered. "How kinetic force and bad manners. We must reach the royal panic room, West Wing, shielded, impenetrable." "No, excuse me. If I was running this op, the panic room is exactly where I'd want you to go. Fatal funnel. 1 door in, 1 door out. We walk in there and we're trapped. Then where? Down, the geothermal catacombs. That is undignified. Dignity gets you killed, ma'am. Down we go." They descended the spiral maintenance stairwell, plunging deep into the subterranean belly of the palace, each step taking them further from the light, further from the carnage, further from everything that made sense. Seraphina was steadier now, walking on her own, keeping pace, not complaining, not demanding. The stairwell was narrow, built for maintenance workers, not royalty. The walls wept condensation. The air grew thicker, warmer. The hum of the geothermal systems rising from below like the breathing of some vast sleeping animal. Halfway down, a sealed blast door, electronic lock, keypad glowing red. Cade examined it. Military grade, encrypted. He didn't have the codes. But Seraphina stepped forward, pressed her palm against the door, closed her eyes, whispered something in the Korvathi root language, something old. The keypad flickered, red to amber to green. The door opened. "The palace AI recognizes the biometric signature of the ruling bloodline," Seraphina said. That flash of regal pride cutting through the exhaustion. "Every door, every lock in this structure was built to obey my blood. Not Draven's. Mine." Handy. "I am not merely decorative, Cade Brennan." "Never said you were, ma'am." Behind them, Cale made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a laugh he didn't want either of them to hear. The geothermal catacombs were a nightmare made of pipes, massive conduits carrying superheated steam and plasma, the air sweltering at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the floor-grated metal that vibrated with the constant thrumming pulse of the planetary geothermal taps. Cade's adrenaline was crashing, the burn in his shoulder roaring back. He gritted his teeth, tore a strip from his ruined tunic, bound the wound one-handed. Seraphina was recovering, standing on her own. She'd torn the lower half of her white gown away. Practical. The hem had been catching on bolts. She looked different down here, in the red emergency lighting, hair falling loose, gown torn at the knees, soot on her skin. She looked real, not an empress, a woman running for her life. And Cade found that he respected her more in this moment than he had on any throne. She caught him looking, raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing, you tore your dress. It was impractical. It was a 12,000 credit designer gown. You know what my wardrobe costs. Security detail reviews all incoming deliveries, ma'am. She stared at him. Then something extraordinary happened. Something that Cade suspected hadn't happened in a very long time. She laughed, short, surprised, almost involuntary, like a hiccup of joy in the middle of a catastrophe. It echoed off the metal pipes and came back to them. Changed, warmer. Then it was gone, and the weight of everything returned. Kyle hissed from the stairwell. Movement! Above us! Heavy! Armored! The blast doors at the top of the shaft hissed open. Heavy metallic footsteps echoed down. 6 figures, descending, massive, clad in crimson and gold armor. The Royal Inquisition, the Empire's elite secret police, each one encased in Class 4 energy shields that hummed with a faint blue glow. And leading them, a voice. Sweep the lower levels. The ape took her down here. I want her head, and I want the human skinned alive. Draven. Seraphina's breath caught. Draven. He was paralyzed. I saw him fall. He faked it, Cade whispered. Neural dampeners, implanted in his skull specifically for this op. Seraphina's face changed. The fear didn't disappear, but fury joined it. 300 years of suspecting that the people closest to her wanted her dead. And now, confirmation. He has 6 Inquisitors, Class 4 energy armor. Your weapon cannot penetrate their shields. Cade looked at his 9mm, 15 rounds, hollow points. She was right. He looked at the massive superheated plasma conduits running along the ceiling, and he smiled, just barely. A tired, dangerous smile. Their shields deflect energy and disintegrate high-velocity impacts. Right, correct. What about steam? What? And gravity and rust. Cade Brennan, what are you planning? Something undignified. He drew his combat knife. Stay here, Kyle. Guard her. Seraphina. He used her name. First time. No title. And something about the way he said it made her stop mid-sentence. I need you alive. The Empire needs you alive. Let me work. She held his gaze. 3 seconds. Those gold eyes burning. Come back, she said. Not an order. A request. Cade slipped into the labyrinth. He was in his element now. Industrial. Cramped. Dark. A maze of pipes and steam and shadows. The kind of place where being big was a disadvantage. He climbed maintenance rungs one-handed, his left arm a throbbing, screaming liability that he was choosing to ignore through sheer force of stubbornness. He perched atop a massive geothermal vent pipe directly above the central thoroughfare, and he waited. Patience belongs to the hunted, the ones who learn to sit perfectly still in the tall grass, waiting for the predator to make one mistake. The Korvathi had spent millennia at the top of the food chain. They had forgotten what it felt like to be prey. They had forgotten that the most dangerous creature in any ecosystem isn't the biggest. It's the one that has spent 1,000,000 years learning how to survive being the smallest. Below him, the 6 Inquisitors moved in a tactical wedge, thermal optics scanning for body heat. But the catacombs were 120 degrees, and Cade's body was sweating. Human thermoregulation, the thing the galaxy mocked as a sign of biological inferiority. Sweat cooling his skin, dropping his thermal signature, masking him against the blazing pipes. To their sensors, he was invisible. The Inquisitors passed directly beneath him, massive, confident, their shields humming blue, their weapons sweeping the corridor ahead, looking forward, looking left, looking right, not looking up, never up. Cade gripped the heavy iron release valve of the superheated steam pipe, waited until the rearmost Inquisitor passed directly beneath, and kicked the lever down with everything he had. A roar. 400 degrees of pressurized steam blasted downward. Energy shields stop bullets. They stop lasers. They do not stop steam. Steam is ambient. It doesn't trigger kinetic sensors. It bypasses energy deflection. It fills the sealed suit like a pressure cooker. The two rear guards screamed. Their armored suits turned into ovens. The remaining four spun, firing plasma rifles blindly into the steam cloud. Cade dropped behind the third guard, kicked the back of its knee, drove his knife into the power pack on its waist, dove flat. The power pack exploded, disabled the shield, locked the armored suit in place, trapping the alien inside its own armor. 3 left. He led them onto an old maintenance catwalk, suspended above a deep geothermal shaft. The heat rising from below was visible, shimmering, making the air dance. The metal of the catwalk was old, rusted, groaning under the weight of nothing but its own age. Cade crossed to the solid concrete edge on the other side, turned, faced them. He could feel the heat from the shaft below, rising, pressing against his back like a furnace. 300 feet of empty air between the catwalk and the boiling magma at the bottom. 2 Inquisitors stepped onto the catwalk. Their combined weight, easily a ton with their armor, made the old metal shriek, a long, agonized sound, like a dying animal. They heard it. Cade could see it in the way they hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But they were soldiers. They were elite. They pushed forward, because backing down from a human would be worse than dying. That was the culture. That was the code. Never retreat from something smaller than you. And that code, that pride, that absolute certainty that size equaled strength, was exactly what Cade was counting on. You die here, human. The lead Inquisitor snarled through his helmet. Wrong. Cade aimed down, at the 3 rusted load-bearing shear pins connecting the catwalk to the wall. 3 rounds. The pins shattered. The catwalk screamed, folded, and dropped. The 2 Inquisitors' energy shields glowed the entire way down. Bright blue. Perfectly functional. Absolutely useless against a 300-foot fall into boiling geothermal magma. Cade holstered his gun, turned around. General Draven stepped out of the shadows. 8.5 feet of scarred, battle-hardened predator. He held a double-bladed plasma sword, both ends ignited, casting harsh blue light that carved his face into a mask of fury. He looked at the carnage around him. His elite guard, boiled, trapped, dropped into magma. 6 of the most dangerous soldiers in the Empire, neutralized by a man half their size, using steam pipes and rust and the most basic law of physics. Gravity. You, Draven snarled, his voice shaking, not with fear, with rage so pure it was almost beautiful. You are not a soldier. You are a rat, fighting like an insect in the walls. I fight like a human, Cade said. His muscles were trembling. The adrenaline was gone. He was running on nothing. Empty. His shoulder was a bonfire. His ribs ached from the assassin's tackle. His hands were steady only because his body had forgotten how to shake. Totally fine, totally, absolutely, completely fine. I will mount your skull on my throne, Draven snarled. Draven charged. 8.5 feet of killing machine closing the distance in 2 strides. A decapitating arc aimed at Cade's neck. Cade dropped to his knees. The blade passed over him. So close the heat blistered his scalp. He thrust his combat knife upward into the unarmored joint of Draven's armpit, the one spot where mobility required a gap in the plating. The steel blade sank to the hilt, severing the brachial artery. Draven roared. The plasma sword dropped. He stumbled backward. Dark violet blood sprang between his fingers. Pulsing, arterial. He sank to his knees, eye level with the human for the first time. You, a pathetic ape. Cade picked up the plasma sword. It hummed in his hands. "The joke's on you, General." But Draven laughed, blood bubbling between his fangs. "You think you saved her? You are a pawn in a game bigger than this empire." Cade's grip tightened. "Ask your master." Draven's voice was fading. "Ask Garrett Hale what he really wants." The name hit Cade like a physical blow. "How do you know that name?" But Draven was done. His eyes glazed. His massive body swayed. Cade swung the plasma sword. One brutal motion. The blade hummed through the air and through Draven's neck without slowing down. The head hit the floor with a heavy thud. The catacombs went silent. Cade dropped the sword, leaned against the wall, slid down to a sitting position, the name echoing in his skull like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Garrett Hale, Garrett Hale, Garrett Hale. His teacher, his mentor, the man who'd given him the gun that just saved an empire, bought him beers on the south side of Chicago, told him the shaking means you're still human. The man who had vanished 2 years ago into the deep black, taking a highly lucrative, highly classified contract and never coming back. Until now. Cade had spent 2 years telling himself Garrett was dead, because dead was easier. Dead was clean. Dead didn't require an explanation. Dead meant the man who taught him everything hadn't chosen to disappear, hadn't chosen something else over the people who needed him. But Garrett wasn't dead. Garrett was here, and he was the architect of every terrible thing that had happened tonight. Seraphina appeared from the shadows, Kael behind her, limping. They stopped at the edge of the destruction, the boiled bodies, the trapped armor, Draven's body, and his severed head 3 feet away. Seraphina looked at Cade, and for the first time since she'd chosen him in that courtyard, he didn't look like a soldier, didn't look like the walking punchline of the galaxy. He looked like a man who just discovered that the ground beneath his feet was hollow. "Who is Garrett Hale?" Seraphina asked quietly. Cade closed his eyes, opened them, stared at the blood on his hands. "The man who made me," he said. "My commanding officer. He taught me everything. How to fight, how to survive, how to kill." He paused. "He gave me the gun that saved your life tonight. And he is connected to Draven. Draven said his name with his dying breath. People don't waste their last words on strangers. What does this mean?" Cade looked up at her, hair matted with soot, gold eyes burning in the emergency light. It means the man who taught me to protect you might be the same man trying to kill you." Silence. Long, heavy. "Can you face him?" Seraphina asked. Not demanding, asking. Cade thought of Ren. Come home soon. Promise. He thought of the woman standing in front of him, who had trusted him because he waited 4 seconds for a blurry pixel of his daughter's face. "I don't have a choice," Cade said, and somewhere far above them, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the orbital defense grid, a ship was no longer waiting. It was moving. The ascent from the catacombs was a grueling, bloody crawl. Cade's shoulder had stopped screaming, which was worse, because when pain stops screaming, it starts whispering. And the whisper said, "You're losing blood, you're losing function, you're running out of time." I ignored it, the same way he'd been ignoring every signal his body had sent him for the last 3 hours. Seraphina walked beside him, not behind, not ahead, beside. Her torn white gown streaked with soot and violet blood. She didn't lean on him anymore. She was upright, steady, her jaw set, her gold eyes burning with something that had been buried under 3 centuries of diplomacy. Rage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't shout. It plans. Kale brought up the rear, limping. His left leg had taken a plasma graze, but he moved without complaint, blade drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. 3 of them. An injured human, a furious Empress, and a young alien guard who had rewritten his entire worldview in the span of one night. They breached the heavy durasteel doors of the West Wing security bunker and found chaos. The surviving remnants of the Royal Guard were in complete disarray. Officers shouting over each other, status screens blinking error codes. The palace was effectively blind, deaf, and naked. Panic evaporated the instant Seraphina walked in. She didn't pause, didn't hesitate. She was covered in blood and ash, supported by the human the galaxy had mocked, walking out of the underworld like something that had been dead and decided it wasn't finished. Lock down the orbital defense grid. Her voice filled the room, diamond-edged. General Draven is dead. He orchestrated this treason. Anyone who hesitates in following my orders will share his fate in the magma shafts. Officers moved, fast. The scrambling mob transformed into a functioning command structure in seconds. Because that was the thing about Seraphina. She didn't command respect. She simply was respect. Embodied, breathing, standing in a ruined dress with blood on her face. Cade slid against the wall. A medical droid injected coagulant foam into his shoulder wound. The foam expanded, cooling, numbing, making the world slightly less awful. Slightly. Your radiance, a communications officer. Nervous. We've completed analysis of the neuropulse generator recovered from the ballroom. It is neither Solari nor Corvathi technology. Cade pushed himself off the wall. Put the schematic on screen. The officer looked at Seraphina. She nodded. The holographic blueprint materialized in the air above the central console, rotating slowly, blue light casting sharp shadows across every face in the room. Cade stared at it, and the last piece of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to solve fell into place. The power relays, blocky, utilitarian, the housing design functional, ugly, built for durability, not elegance. The serial markings along the base unit, partially scratched off, but not enough. Not nearly enough to fool someone who had spent years working with this exact type of equipment. That's a modified G4S interstellar sonic crowd suppression rig, Cade said, his voice flat. Dead. Military grade. Export restricted. You can't buy one on the open market. You need government clearance. Or you need to steal it from someone who has government clearance. The room went silent. G4S Interstellar, the same company whose logo had been on the listening device in Seraphina's study, the same company that held half the off-world mining contracts in the Outer Rim, the same company Garrett Hale had done contract work for before he disappeared. A human weapon, Seraphina said, her gold eyes on the schematic, then on Cade. Draven was the muscle, but he didn't have the brains or the clearance to smuggle human tech past your planetary shields. He needed a partner, someone with access to Earth's black market military hardware, someone who understood human biology well enough to calibrate a neuropulse weapon to spare one specific species. Cade swallowed. Someone human. The bunker's proximity alarm screamed. Red light, strobing, the whale cutting through the command center. Unidentified dropship breaching the upper atmosphere. An officer shouted. It is bypassing our automated defense grid. They have our authorization codes. Draven sold them the codes before the gala, Cade said. Insurance policy. The holographic display shifted to a live feed. A sleek, matte black stealth transport burning through the Priman atmosphere. A single dark emblem on the hull, a sword passing through a skull. Wraith Company. Ex-Earth Coalition special operatives who had traded their uniforms for mercenary contracts that paid in blood and dilithium. The ship bypassed the docking bays, hovering directly outside the reinforced plastel windows. Side doors blew open. Grappling cables slammed into the palace architecture. And then, Cade's comms earpiece crackled, overriding the secure Corvathi frequency. A voice, calm, amused, familiar as his own heartbeat. Well, I'll be damned, the little ape didn't die. Cade's entire body went cold. Garrett, Cade whispered. Hey, kid. Garrett Hale, his teacher, His mentor, the man who'd held him upright after his first kill on Orion 7. When Cade was 22 and shaking so hard he couldn't hold his rifle, Garrett had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "The shaking means you're still human. The day it stops, that's when you worry." That hand, that voice, that man, coming to kill the woman Cade was sworn to protect. "I told Draven not to play with his food." Garrett's voice filled the command center. "I told him to shoot the Empress and take the throne. Clean, simple. But he had to make a show of it. Had to hire those Solari amateurs." A pause, static. "And now I have to come down there and clean up his mess. Nothing personal. Cade. Nothing personal." The same thing Garrett used to say before every mission briefing. As if violence was just weather. Something that happened around you, not because of you. "What do you want, Garrett?" "The Crimean dilithium mining rights. 3 trillion credits over 20 years. Enough to build my own fleet. Free from every government and corporation that ever used us as disposable meat shields. And the Empress has to die. Can't restructure an empire without removing the crown. It's just architecture." "Garrett, don't do this." A laugh, short, warm, genuine. "You're standing in a room full of oversized lizards who can barely hold their rifles. I've got 12 Tier 1 operators equipped with bleeding-edge kinetic gear. Room-clearing protocols I wrote myself." Another pause. "Tell the alien queen to say her prayers." The comms cut out. Seraphina looked at Cade. "Can you stop your own kind?" It wasn't an accusation. It was the sound of a woman who had been alive for 3 centuries asking if the one person she'd chosen to trust was going to choose her. Cade checked his pistol magazine. 15 rounds. He grabbed a heavy Korvathi fragmentation grenade from a fallen guard's belt. Picked up an assault rifle from the weapons rack. "They're not my kind," he said, chambering a round. "They're just targets." "Cade," he stopped. "He is your teacher, the man who made you. I know what he is, and you can still face him." Cade turned, looked at her. Golden hair matted with blood and ash. Gold eyes holding the kind of trust that costs everything. "I can face anything," he said, "as long as my daughter is safe at the end of it." Something moved across Seraphina's face. Deep. She opened her mouth, closed it, then simply nodded. But she didn't hide. She walked to the communications console, pushed an officer aside, began typing. "Draven's access codes are still active in the system." Her fingers moved across the holographic keyboard with speed that made every officer stare. "If I can isolate his authorization matrix, I can revoke the codes he sold to the mercenaries, cut their access to our defense grid." "How long?" Cade asked. 3 minutes. "You have 90 seconds. After that, those doors come down." Seraphina looked at him and smiled. Brief, fierce. The smile of someone who had been pretending to be gentle for 300 years and was done pretending. "Then I will type faster." The doors blew inward. Deafening shockwave. White, acrid smoke. The Korvathi guards opened fire immediately. Blue plasma bolts streaking into the breach. Exactly what Wraith Company expected. 3 stun grenades bounced into the room. Bang, bang, bang. The Korvathi guards dropped, their highly sensitive eyes and ears overloaded. They collapsed, clutching their heads, screaming through the smoke. 12 figures, heavy composite tactical armor, matte black visors, moving with synchronized precision that made the Korvathi military look like amateurs. At the center, Garrett Hale, 53 years old, gray at the temples, lean, his visor up, gray eyes visible, calm, always calm. Clear the room, find the Empress. But Cade wasn't in the room. The moment the first breaching charge hit, Cade had vaulted the central holographic table, shimmied up a maintenance pillar, wedged himself into the shadowed vaulted ceiling. Because Garrett trained his men to look for threats at eye level. They looked for massive alien bodies. They tracked thermal signatures on the horizontal plane. They didn't look up. Cade waited, pressed against the cold metal beam, breathing controlled, shallow, silent. The rear guard entered, last man in, the formation closed. Cade pulled the pin on the Corvathi fragmentation grenade, held the spoon 1 second, 2 seconds, the most terrifying 2 seconds of his life. He dropped it into the center of their diamond formation. Grenade too late. The alien explosive detonated. Concussive force blew 3 operators off their feet, shattered their armor plating. Cade dropped from the ceiling, 15 feet, straight down, onto the shoulders of an operator, his combat knife going in through the gap at the base of the neck, using the man's own falling momentum to drive the blade. He was on the ground, moving before the body hit the floor. "Contact above," Garrett yelled. But Cade was already in the chaos. Human-on-human close-quarters combat. The dark, ugly, intimate reality of it. No grand displays, no sweeping strikes, just angles, leverage, speed, and the willingness to do terrible things faster than the other person. The observing Corvathi officers, those still conscious, watched in paralyzed horror. They had fought wars, conquered planets, commanded armies, but they had never seen anything like this. The way the humans moved, like water in a pipe, like fire in a corridor, fast, low, brutal. Every motion designed for one thing and one thing only: maximum damage in minimum time. This was what happened when you took a species that had spent 1,000,000 years as prey and gave them weapons. Cade grabbed a fallen assault rifle, human make, familiar weight, the stock settling into his shoulder like a handshake from an old friend. He fired a sustained burst into the legs of 2 mercenaries. They dropped, screaming. He discarded the empty rifle, drew his 9mm, slid across the blood-slicked floor on his knees, fired 3 rounds, 2 into the visor of a merc flanking Seraphina, 1 into the underarm gap of another. Kale was fighting too, his Corvathi blade singing through the smoke, using his size to block corridors, to funnel the operators into spaces where their formations broke down. "Suppressing fire," Garrett roared. His remaining men unleashed a torrent of rounds, shredding the command consoles. The room became a blender of sparks and ricochets. Cade dove behind a massive titanium databank. Bullets chewed the metal inches from his head. Outgunned, outnumbered, his shoulders screaming. 4 men left, including Garrett. "You're getting slow, Cade," Garrett's voice. Conversational, gentle. "You always were too sentimental. Die for a paycheck. Sure. But dying for an alien who treated you like a pet, that's pathetic." Cade pressed his back against the titanium, breathing hard. He looked at the massive power conduit running along the floor, feeding the orbital defense grid's mainframe, positioned directly behind Garrett's advancing position. Raw electrical plasma contained in shielding, designed to withstand cosmic radiation, but not designed to withstand 3 hollow point rounds. "I'm not dying for her, Garrett." He rolled out from cover, aimed at the conduit. "I'm surviving for my daughter." 3 shots. The conduit ruptured. A massive arc of raw electrical plasma erupted outward. The Wraith operators clad in metal and composite gear were perfect conductors. 3 men convulsed, thousands of volts surging through their suits. Then the palace circuit breakers slammed down. Darkness, red emergency lighting. Only Garrett remained. He jumped backward, avoided the arc, but the blast had knocked his rifle away. Cade stood up, dropped his empty pistol. It hit the floor with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. He drew his combat knife. Garrett laughed. A harsh sound, jagged, but genuine. He drew a tactical machete from his hip. "Just you and me, kid, like the old days." They stood facing each other in the red light. Seraphina behind Cade, still at the console, fingers still moving, revoking Draven's codes, doing her job while the world ended around her. "You know the worst part," Garrett said, rotating the machete casually. I designed this whole thing around you. Cade didn't move. The neuropulse. I calibrated it to spare humans because I knew you'd be in that room. I knew you'd fight. I knew you'd protect her. I knew you'd bring her exactly where I needed her. I know. You were my best student, the only one who really got it. Survival isn't about strength, it's about will. I counted on that. I know. Then you know you were never the hero. You were the delivery system. Cade's grip tightened. Was threatening my daughter part of the plan, too? Silence. Oh, that. Garrett's expression didn't change. I don't have anyone in Chicago. Cade, Ren is fine. She's always been fine. I needed you off balance for 30 seconds. The relief was so enormous it buckled his knees. Ren was safe. And right behind the relief, something older and uglier. You used her name, Cade said. Quiet. You used my daughter's name. As a weapon. Nothing personal. Everything is personal, Garrett. You taught me that too. Garrett lunged. He was bigger. 53, but built like a man who never stopped training. Not an ounce of softness anywhere. The machete came in fast. A brutal horizontal arc aimed at Cade's neck. The kind of swing that came from a man who had practiced it 10,000 times on training dummies and living targets alike. Cade ducked, felt the wind of the blade, felt it ruffle his hair. An inch lower and his head would have been rolling across the floor. Garrett didn't pause. He was a machine, a beautiful, terrible, perfectly calibrated machine. He reversed the machete, swung backhand. Cade leapt backward. The tip of the blade caught his chest, slicing through his tunic, drawing a thin red line from sternum to rib. Not deep, but it stung, and it sent a message. I can reach you whenever I want. Garrett followed up. A knee to the ribs, heavy, precise. The kind of strike that came from knowing exactly where a human liver sits and exactly how much force it takes to shut one down. Cade felt something crack. He crashed backward into a shattered terminal, gasping, tasting blood. Garrett stood over him, machete raised, red emergency light carving his face into something Cade almost didn't recognize. Almost. But the eyes were the same, those calm, gray, teacher's eyes. Nothing personal. Kid. The blade came down. Cade didn't block. Blocking was losing. Garrett's own lesson. When you can't beat the force, redirect it. He twisted, hard. The heavy machete bit deep into the titanium console, right where his head had been. The blade stuck, embedded in the dense metal. For a microsecond, that was all a human ever needed. Human. Cade drove his combat knife upward, with every ounce of remaining strength, every molecule of adrenaline his battered body could manufacture. Every Tuesday night phone call, every blurry pixel of his daughter's face, every promise he'd made and kept and broken and made again. The high-carbon steel went in under the ribs, through the diaphragm, into the heart. Garrett gasped. His eyes went wide. Those gray eyes, staring down at his student, at the blade. The machete slipped from his fingers. Check your corners, Cade whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. Old man. Garrett's mouth opened. Something that might have been a smile crossed his lips, or a grimace, or the last reflex of a dying man who understood that he had taught his student too well. He fell backward, slow, heavy, silence, total, absolute. Cade pulled the knife free, wiped it on his ruined trousers. He closed Garrett's eyes, gently, the way you close a book you loved, even though the ending broke your heart. He straightened the collar of Garrett's tactical vest, an absurd gesture. The gesture of a student who didn't know how to say goodbye to the teacher who had made him and then tried to unmake him. You taught me everything, Cade said. To no one. To the body. To the dark. Everything except how to forgive you for this. He sat down, on the floor, next to the body, put his face in his hands. And he didn't cry. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But there are places beyond tears, places where the sadness is so complete that the body doesn't know what to do with it. So it just sits and breathes and waits. Seraphina approached. She stepped around the bodies, past the shattered consoles and the spent casings and the blood. So much blood, human and alien, red and violet, mixed together until you couldn't tell which was which. She stopped in front of Cade, the walking punchline of the galaxy, covered in sweat and grease and the blood of people he'd loved and people he'd never met. His hands shaking, his eyes dry, his face empty. She sank to her knees, in the grime, in the blood, her white gown staining, ruining. She didn't care. She reached out, placed one trembling hand on his uninjured shoulder. And it wasn't the gesture of a monarch to a servant. It wasn't politics. It wasn't strategy. It was the gesture of someone who had watched a miracle and didn't have a word for what it cost. "The galaxy is blind," Seraphina said softly. "They mocked your people. They mocked me for choosing you." Cade looked up at her, those gold eyes, level with his for once. "I know what you lost tonight," she whispered. "I know what it cost you, and I will not insult you by calling it sacrifice. Because sacrifice implies choice, and you never had one. You did what you are, what your people are." She paused. "You survived." Cade said nothing, so he just looked at her, kneeling in blood and ash, her golden hair falling forward, framing her face, her gold eyes wet. She was crying, and the tears, whatever they were made of, caught the red emergency light and shimmered. "You are not a punchline, Cade Brennan," she said. He managed a tired, lopsided, broken grin. "Damn right I'm not." The next 72 hours were a blur. The orbital defense grid came back online. The palace was locked down. Draven's entire conspiracy network was unraveled. Officers, diplomats, 24 co-conspirators across 6 star systems. Arrested, detained. Kale was promoted, field commission, the youngest Royal Guard captain in the Empire's history. He stood at attention when the announcement was made, but his eyes found Cade across the room, and he gave the smallest nod. Later, in the corridor, when no one was watching, Kyle stopped Cade, put a massive scaled hand on his good shoulder. The gesture was awkward. Korvathi didn't touch casually, but Kyle did it anyway. "I have a younger sister," Kale said, his voice rough. "She is training for the Guard Academy. She is small. For a Korvathi, the other cadets mock her." Cade waited. "I used to tell her that strength was everything, that she needed to be bigger, harder, more like them." He paused. "I was wrong. I am going to tell her about you. That the strongest being I have ever witnessed weighed 210 pounds and fought with a sharpened piece of metal." Cade's throat tightened, but he kept his face still. "Tell her to work on her footwork," Cade said. "Size doesn't matter if you're faster." Kale walked away, and Cade stood alone, thinking about all the ways one night had changed things he couldn't see. Ripples moving outward, through a young guard, through a younger sister, through an academy full of cadets who might grow up believing something different than their parents did. Small things, the kind that don't make headlines, but make history. The Neuropulse device was dismantled. The G4S connection traced through 17 shell companies back to a shadow board of Earth-based military industrialists. Seraphina forwarded the evidence to the Earth Coalition. Within a week, 14 executives were under arrest. G4S Interstellar's board was dissolved. And on the third morning, Seraphina summoned every diplomatic channel in the Empire, every holovid network, every communication relay across 3,000 star systems. And she played the footage, all of it. The gala, the pulse, the bodies hitting the floor, the 4 assassins climbing the dais, and the single human, standing over the paralyzed Empress, drawing a primitive weapon, and fighting. 3 trillion sentient beings watched. And then Seraphina spoke. She stood on the balcony, the same balcony where Cade had once watched her whisper to 3 moons. But now, the entire galaxy was listening. Her golden hair caught the morning light of the Crimean sun. Her white gown new, clean flowed in the breeze. "We laughed at them," she began, her voice carrying across the silence of 1 trillion listening ears. "We called them soft, fragile, a joke, a species barely worth remembering. We measured their worth by the thickness of their skin and the shortness of their lives. And we decided they were nothing." She paused. Let the silence build. "Last night, the strongest among us fell. Every warrior, every general, every guard bred for combat and engineered for survival, collapsed, helpless, paralyzed on the floor of my own palace." Another pause. "And one human stood." Her voice cracked just slightly. "He had no armor, no shields, no enhancements. He had a knife his teacher gave him, and a gun so old your museums would reject it. And he fought. Not because he was ordered to, not because he was engineered to. He fought because there was someone behind him who needed to live. And that was enough." She looked directly into the broadcast lens. "We measure strength in scales and claws and the ability to crush. But strength is not the capacity to destroy. Strength is the choice to stand. When everything in you says run. Strength is the man who calls his daughter every week across 400 light years. Even though the signal takes 4 seconds. Even though the image is blurry. Even though she is growing up without him. He calls every week. Because love is not a weakness. It is the only weapon that matters." She straightened. "I chose a human bodyguard as a joke." The galaxy laughed. But the joke was on all of us. Because while we were laughing, he was watching, learning, preparing. And when the darkness came, he was the only one still standing. Her voice dropped to a whisper that 3 trillion beings heard. "His name is Cade Brennan. He is a father, a soldier, and the finest being I have ever known in 300 years of life. And if any soul in this empire ever calls a human a joke again, they will answer to me." The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy. Silence. Then slowly, something else. Something that started small and built. Not a roar, not a cheer. Something quieter and more dangerous. A shift. In the mining stations of the Outer Rim, human workers stopped, put down their tools, looked at each other with something they hadn't felt in decades. Not pride exactly. Something quieter. Recognition. A man in a hard hat on a dilithium rig in the Kepler sector pulled off his glove and stared at his own hand. Soft, unscaled, breakable. The hand the galaxy laughed at. And for the first time in his life, he didn't see weakness, he saw potential. We are not nothing. In the alien schools across 1,000 worlds, where human children sat in the back rows, smaller than everyone else, quieter, always aware that they were the punchline. Those children heard the Empress's voice, and something shifted in their posture, in their eyes, in the way they held their heads. A girl on a colony world in the Andromeda Reach, 8 years old, human, sitting in a classroom full of Korvathi children who called her Squish. She heard the broadcast on her school's public feed. And the next morning, she walked into that classroom and sat in the front row. For the first time, we are not a joke. In the corridors of the Obsidian Palace, where Korvathi officers pass human maintenance workers every day without looking at them, without seeing them, those officers stopped and looked, some of them for the first time, not with respect, not yet. Respect would take years, generations. But with something that came before respect, curiosity, the beginning of the question, what else did we get wrong? 3 days later, Seraphina offered Cade the position of Lord Commander. They were in her private study, The room where he'd found the listening device a lifetime ago. The device was gone. The walls had been swept. Twice. She sat at her desk. He stood, because he always stood. The Empire needs a new military commander, she said. Someone I trust. Someone the court fears. Someone the galaxy will never forget. I'm honored, ma'am. But, but I have a daughter on Earth. She's 12. She plays piano on Tuesdays. She got a 92 on her last math test, and she's mad about the 8 points she lost for messy handwriting. Seraphina's lips pressed together, not in anger, in heartbreak. The specific heartbreak of someone who had finally found what they'd been looking for and was about to watch it leave. 300 years, she had watched countless beings come and go, advisors, lovers, friends, if you could call them that. Every one of them eventually revealed what they really wanted: power, access, influence. She had learned to expect it, to armor herself against it, to never let anyone close enough to disappoint her. And then a human had walked into her courtyard, small and breakable and completely unimpressed by everything around him. And he had done the one thing no one else had ever done. He had stayed, not because of her crown, not because of her power, not because of her beauty. He had stayed because someone was in danger and he was the only one who could help. And that was enough. That was always enough. For him. I cannot force you to stay. No, but I would like you to. The words hung in the air, simple, honest, raw. An empress doesn't ask, doesn't want, doesn't admit that the palace is emptier than it was a week ago. But Seraphina wasn't speaking as an empress. She was speaking as the girl on the balcony. 3 moons, empty sky, 300 years and still no one real. Cade felt that tightening in his chest again. That unauthorized, inconvenient, completely inappropriate tightening that he'd been filing away since the first time she'd walked across a courtyard in a white gown and he forgot to breathe. I'll make you a deal, he said. I do not make deals, I make decrees. Then decree this: give me ambassador status, special envoy. Whatever title lets me travel between Earth and Crimea without a 12-month contract. I go home. I see my kid. I come back. You would return. Every time. Why? Because of Ren, because of the job, because of the Empire, because someone had to make sure no one ever tried this again. Because of you. He didn't say that last part, but the way Seraphina's eyes softened told him she heard it anyway. Ambassador Brennan. She tested the title. It lacks the gravitas of Lord Commander. I'll compensate with personality. That smile again. Real. Unguarded. Agreed, she said, but I have one condition. Name it. Weekends. When you call your daughter, you call from the palace, on my personal comm system. No 4-second delay. No blurry image. Crystal clear. Real time. Cade stared at her. She had just offered him the one thing no amount of money or rank could buy. A clear connection to Ren. Real time. No lag. No frozen pixels. Just his daughter's face. Sharp. Bright. Alive. Every freckle. Every eye roll. Every smile that looked exactly like his own, but better. He had spent 14 months watching his daughter's face through a screen that buffered every 4 seconds, watching her mouth move, then waiting, then hearing words that belonged to a moment already gone, always out of sync, always late, like trying to hold someone's hand through a glass wall. And this woman, this alien empress, who could have offered him fleets, titles, planets, was offering him the only thing that mattered. His throat closed. Something behind his eyes burned, and for the first time since the ballroom, since the catacombs, since the knife and the gun and the bodies on the floor, Cade Brennan felt something crack open inside him that he'd been holding shut for a very long time. He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. That's the best deal anyone's ever offered me. I am the Empress. I do not offer anything less than the best. He went home. A Corvathi diplomatic shuttle. Fast, smooth. 4 hours instead of 4 months. He sat in the passenger bay, alone, his shoulder bandaged, his ribs wrapped, his face still carrying the faint shadow of bruises. The bay was enormous, built for Corvathi passengers, which meant Cade was sitting in a chair the size of a small couch, his feet not quite reaching the floor, like a kid in his father's recliner. Under any other circumstances, it would have been funny. Right now, he was too tired to notice. I held the photo. Rennet 7, missing teeth, Navy Pier. He'd kept it face down for the last 5 days. Focused, preparing, fighting. He turned it face up, and he looked at it, really looked at it, the way you look at something you almost lost and just got back. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb, felt the glass, cool, smooth, real. She's growing up, he thought. She's growing up, and I'm missing it. She's going to be 13 next month, then 14, then 15, and every year I'm out here is a year I don't get back. Every bedtime story I don't read. Every piano recital I don't attend. Every Tuesday night I'm not sitting at the kitchen table helping with math homework. But now, with the ambassador title, with Seraphina's comm system, he wouldn't have to choose anymore. He could be there, here and there, both worlds, both lives. The shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere, descended through clouds, through rain, through the gray Chicago sky that he'd missed more than he'd ever admitted. Landing pad, O'Hare, a car, the old neighborhood, streets he'd memorized before he could drive, the apartment building with the crack in the ceiling he'd never fixed. He stood on the front steps, still in his Corvathi bandages. The rain had stopped, but the street was wet, reflecting the streetlights. The old basketball hoop across the street still broken, still leaning at that sad angle he'd been meaning to help the neighbor fix. 2 years ago, nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He rang the bell, the old bell, the one that buzzed instead of chimed because the wiring was bad. He heard right through the door, that familiar, ugly, beautiful buzz. Footsteps, quick, light, the specific rhythm of a 12-year-old who has been waiting for something and just realized it arrived. The door opened. Ren, 12 years old, brown hair, messy ponytail, her mother's nose, his jaw, standing in the doorway in a faded green jacket that was still too big. She looked at him. He looked at her. And everything, every fight, every wound, every death, every promise, every 4-second delay, every blurry pixel, every lie he'd told her to keep her safe, every truth he'd hidden to keep her innocent, all of it collapsed into one single, perfect, unbreakable moment. She ran into his arms. He held her, tight, tighter than he'd ever held anything, his face buried in her hair, his eyes closed, his hands shaking, not from pain, not from exhaustion, from the sheer overwhelming relief of being exactly where he was supposed to be. "You're home," Ren said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I'm home," Cade said, and above them, high above the gray Chicago clouds, a Corvathi shuttle banked silently through the atmosphere, its hull gleaming against the pale sky. On the observation deck, Seraphina stood, golden hair loose, catching the distant Earth sunlight. She looked down through the viewport, at the city below, at the small figure holding a smaller figure on the steps of an ordinary building on an ordinary street on a planet the galaxy had written off as a joke. She smiled, not the political smile, not the strategic smile, not the mask she wore for courts and councils and cameras, just a smile, small, warm, private. The smile of someone who had finally found something real. The shuttle rose, broke through the clouds, and vanished into the stars. And from that day forward,